Hey, it's Paul. So today I'm going to talk to you about now, hopefully you're at a position where if you've been following my videos, you've got sourcing set up, it's working consistently for you, it's generating the responses that you need. And what we're going to cover in today's video is what you actually need to do with those responses. So really it's what do you say to an owner when they make that first call back to you, so that you can ascertain whether or not they're interested to sell their company. So let's dive into it. So first, I would thank them for responding and clarify with a sort of introduction and purpose of the call. So, you're an investor and you're looking to acquire businesses in their space. I then ask them straight out, are they interested in exploring an exit and a sale from their business at the current time? I'll then ask them to give me a little bit of a background and ultimately, whether it be the first call or subsequent meetings, you always want to listen to them more than you talk. It's ultimately about rapport building, relationship building. Once you've got rapport, you gain their trust. Once you've got their trust, you can then start talking to them about what a deal may look like. So, some open questions that you could use to sort of kickstart that conversation is, perhaps you can give me a background on the business. Can I ask you, are you in a process to sell the business? Have you engaged anyone to assist you in that process, or is this one of the first conversations that you may have had? And really, what you're trying to do here is ascertain whether or not they've got an advisor, whether they've got any expectation of process, or whether this is all new to them, and you might need to educate them on the process, and you can adapt your conversation accordingly. If they've done something about it, I'd probably ask some questions around, have they received much interest? Have they had any offers? Why didn't they accept any of those offers? What feedback have they had? How long have they been involved in the process? When you sell the business, is there somebody already in situ that can take over from you? Really, what you're trying to do here is understand whether there's a capable management team in place, whether that succession planning has happened. For some deal makers, that can be a red flag. If it's owner operated and very reliant on the owner, then it might put you off acquiring. For others, that might not necessarily be the case, particularly if they have expertise in that sector. So really, it's about fact finding, understanding the position. Have you given any thought to how long you might be prepared to be involved in a handover for? And again, you can use this then maybe to set expectations around your expectations that maybe you expect the owner to be involved for 6 to 12 months post transaction to enable a sort of smooth handover. Aside from the financial components of a deal, is there anything that's important to them? And really, what you're trying to understand is, what their expectations of a buyer are, what's going to work for them, what's not. I always find that, aside from the financial components of a transaction, that most sellers are interested in who they're selling to. So, what are you going to do with their business? What are you going to do to change it? Are you going to change the name, fire the staff, keep it the same, improve it, build on the legacy? Most business owners tend to be more interested in their legacy, sometimes more over than their actual financial components of a transaction. Have they thought about what they may want to sell a company for? Again, don't ask, don't get. They might not tell you, but I'd ask the question. Have they got any timescales in mind as to when they want to sell the business? And really, you're trying to understand, whether they're super motivated to do something now, whether this is more of a longer term. And then I suppose once you've done that sort of fact finding, building rapport, you've used some of those questions to maybe set expectations. I'd get into sort of thanking them for sharing that information, give them a bit more about me, my background, my experience, the type of buyer I am. So I might say something as follows. So the first thing for me to say is that the reason we want to buy a long established profitable company in this industry is that we want to use it as an anchor to grow. So principally through acquisition. Ideally, we want to make tactical and strategic acquisitions in this industry to form a larger group. And when you start putting companies together, you can drive a whole host of benefits, whether it be economies of scale, buying power, cross-selling opportunities. So we see ourselves more as a facilitator. So we bring the tools, the resources, and most importantly, the capital to the table to enable a business to grow. And really, we're backing an existing management team to grow the company. So it's not about changing things or trying to reinvent the wheel. We won't be changing the name. We won't be firing the staff. Quite the opposite. In fact, we're probably likely to hire more people as we grow. It's really about building upon what's already been created, a well-run, profitable, established company, and taking it on to the next level. So let me tell you a little bit more about how we structure deals. There are many different ways to value a company, but I found in my experience it really boils down to what a willing buyer and seller are prepared to transact for. and whether or not they're aligned. So generally, we tend to look at the profits of the business. We're basing the deal on either the most recent financials, or maybe we take an average over a period of time, and we look at the balance sheet to understand what assets and liabilities we may require on closing, and we sort of add these two things together to give us a sort of overall purchase price. Typically, we're not paying all of that in cash at closing. We're going to pay a meaningful sum, but there's always going to be some degree of staged payments. And the reason for this is that there is a huge risk when there's a change of ownership in an SME that customers may go elsewhere, staff may get may leave, supply chain may get a bit jittery. So if we have some form of sort of seller financing and you're involved in a handover of the business, this does help go some way to protecting this goodwill. So yeah, we want to understand how you run the business. The second part is to, hand over those relationships with staff and customers over that handover period. And whilst you might not need it as an incentive, you ultimately have an invested interest, because if you haven't had all of the money at closing, and you've got to wait a period of time for some of that further consideration to come to you, then you're more likely to stick around and help us work through that handover effectively. The next steps, Mr. Business Owner, if you're interested to progress, would be for us to put in place an NDA, confidentiality agreement, and this enables us to share information between one another, and then we can have a more detailed discussion. So shall we organise an NDA after this call? Can have it emailed to you, or if you have your own version you prefer to use, we're happy either way. And really you want to just close them down for, getting that NDA in place, when they're going to return it, and then you can, arrange that more detailed discussion. So, done well, that call probably takes around about 30 to 45 minutes. You can get a sort of, very quick feel for, are they motivated? Are they going to be realistic? You set some expectations around how you structure deals, how you value companies, that you're not going to pay them all of the money, that there's going to be some sort of seller financing. So, ultimately, if any of that doesn't sit right with them, doesn't feel aligned to what they're looking for, then it means that you're not going to waste any further time with, subsequent meetings. One risk, I'd say, when you're originating deals is you can end up having lots and lots of long, detailed meetings with lots of very nice people, but ultimately don't get anywhere. So we found that actually filtering out using this sort of structure works very well. So if they're going to progress to a second call, ultimately, if you get to an offer, it's not going to be any surprise to them when you don't offer them all of the cash at closing, that there's going to be some sort of seller financing involved. So once you move towards that sort of second call, really it's a repeat of the first, but you're just diving into more detail. So some of the other questions you could ask could be, who are their main customers? How long have they been doing business with them? Are there any customer concentration risks? Who are their main suppliers? Who are the key people in their management team, and how long have they worked with the business for? Are there any skills gaps or experience in the management team from a seller's perspective that they feel we might need to plug? What does the future pipeline look like? Particularly important if it's a business that has long-term contracts, or they're about to win a large tender. Motivation, why is now the right time to sell? What do you want to sell the business for? Have they given any thoughts to what they're going to do with the proceeds of the sale? Do they have any certain amount that they need at closing for something specific? And have they looked at, what they're going to do with the proceeds of that sale? Are they looking to invest it? Those questions are quite important, because when you actually come to making the offer, if they've told you, look, they need some cash to pay off their mortgage, maybe to help the kids out, maybe they want to put something away for a rainy day, maybe they want to have some cash to invest, maybe they want to reinvest some of this in real estate, rental, that sort of stuff. You can use those answers to then frame when you make the sort of seller financing, and having that sort of passive income and interest maybe on that seller financing saves them having the hassle of sort of investing in property and dealing with tenants and agents and all of those sorts of things. They've only got to deal with you. So you can use those sort of things to frame the offer when you get there. Some of the things that I suppose may come up, and I guess again you want to probably set expectations, is I'd probably revisit the whole valuation and deal structure again. So I'd probably say something along the lines of, look, when we spoke last time, you'd mentioned that you'd given some thought to what you would make the deal work for you from a practical sense. And I just want to dive into how we can get to this point where we make you a financial proposal. So the way that we would normally structure something would be to look at the underlying profits of the company. We either look over a period of time and take an average, or we look at the most recent and we apply a multiple to that. We'll then look at the balance sheet to see what assets and liabilities we would acquire on closing, and we add these things together to give us an overall purchase price. Now, if we can get an NDA in place, and you're able to share with us some financial information. We can give you some sort of ballpark idea as to where we actually would sit. So it won't be a formal proposal, but it means that we can have that whole financial conversation early on in the process. So look, if we're not aligned, then we're not going to waste each other's time. But equally, if we are aligned, then it's worth us all investing the time to get to know one another in more detail, understand the business in more detail, and progress with a transaction. But obviously, if we can't get past the financial component, then there's no point. So, would you be happy to share some information so we can give you this sort of ballpark? Um, Sort of justifying the deferred payments and succession planning, I'd probably really make sure that this is, spoken about again in this second call, really reiterating what you said in the first. So I might say something like, look, I mentioned last time we spoke, when we structure a deal, we never pay all of the purchase price at closing. There's always going to be some degree of deferred consideration or earnout, because we want to protect the goodwill. We don't want customers going somewhere else. We don't want key staff leaving, and we certainly don't want the supply chain to get jittery. So by you having some sort of vested interest in that you've not had all of the cash at closing gives us some confidence you're going to stick around to work through that handover. Deal structure and funding, I'd also probably set the expectation here. So I think it's really important to tell you, Mr. Business owner, how we sort of structure the deal legally and how we fund it. Firstly, we use an LLC or limited company that ultimately I'll be a shareholder of. That company will then buy the shares. If you're in the US, you refer to shares as stock, not to be confused with inventory. And it will sit as a wholly owned subsidiary. So there'll be two elements to funding the deal. Firstly, we're going to borrow the money into that holding company, secured against the assets of your company, that will provide the initial payment at closing. If you were providing equity, then you might mention that too. And the second part is the second element is seller financing deferred payments that will be structured with appropriate loan note and security. I also want to talk through timescale with them. So I might say something like, we're keen to proceed. So if we get to a point where we are in an agreement on the deal, normally it will take 3 to 4 months from negotiating a deal to a completion. And during this time period, we're going to run due diligence. Our due diligence isn't too laborious. In fact, we'll give you a checklist of information that you can upload to a secure data room. We'll review information remotely. We'll come back with questions, queries, or requests for further information. But as long as everybody's proactive in communication, we can usually work through that process over a sort of 4-week period. We then move on to the legal process, which typically takes a similar timescale, and all concurrently while we're doing that, we're also raising the funding to complete the transaction. What objections might you get? So I guess the key ones really are valuation. Maybe they want more money up front. Maybe the deferred payment period is too long. Maybe they're not willing to do the handover period for as long as you want them. Maybe there's some sort of security around deferred. And I suppose what a lot of those objections are really doing, maybe not so much valuation, but certainly not enough upfront, not deferred being too long, security for deferred, is really, I suppose, highlighting that maybe they don't quite trust you, that ultimately they want to know that their money is safe with you, that you're going to pay them when you're supposed to pay them, and being able to demonstrate other deals that you've done, introduce other sellers, case studies, track record, etc., can help overcome those things. Valuation, I guess it's just really down to a willing buyer and seller. And sometimes when you make that first proposal and they say no, it could go in your revisit pile, and maybe you'll be back in touch with them in 6 or 9 months' time to see if they've become more realistic. But there's plenty of research out there. Harvard Business School, I read an article last week, shows that the average sale price for an SME is 2.52 times multiple, and the vast majority of businesses that are listed for sale don't sell. I think there's about 10,000 businesses closing every week in America, for example, because business owners are forced to sell. Maybe they've got a health issue and there just isn't a viable route for them to sell the business. I mentioned that maybe handover period could be an issue. Usually, most of the time, sellers are willing to invest the time and attention required. But if there are specific requirements for them to leave sooner, it's really just trying to understand why and mapping out what that handover period could look like. So maybe they have a health reason, for example, and you can sort of figure out how you could work with that. So if you've liked this video, give it the thumbs up. It really helps the channel. If you'd like to be notified when the next video comes out, then do click subscribe. And if you're interested to learn more about M&A or connect with me or deal makers around the world, you can join our free community, link in the description below. For now, happy deal making.